Good afternoon. I am the Dean of the Dietrich College of Humanities and Social Sciences, one of 7 great colleges at Carnegie Mellon. Before we start, I just want to thank President Suresh and my wife. It's my birthday today. But wait. And over breakfast, my wife asked me what I want for my birthday. I don't know, I said, give me a few minutes to think about it. And about an hour later, I got an email from President Suresh announcing this wonderful gift. So I yelled down to her, how about a new building for Dietrich College? Great idea, she said. I'll tell Subra it's your birthday and see what I can do. So long story short, I'm delighted to accept this new building for Dietrich College as my birthday present. Sorry to all you other deans. Before I introduce our panelists, I want to mention that several people will be distributing note cards for anyone who would like to submit a question to the panel. You want to identify yourself now? Yes, there's people going to be walking around. If you want to actually pose a question, give them a signal. They'll give you a card. You can write it down. They'll collect it in the aisle, and then Steve Klain will be selecting the questions to pose to the panel. As you can see, I have the easy job. So in some form or other, governments, industries, and academics have been partnering for several thousand years. In the last century, however, and particularly in the last 20 to 30 years, the amount of money devoted to R&D by governments, industries, and universities has exploded. Although their interests often overlap, their core missions do differ. And the core mission of government is to establish justice, provide for the common defense, and perhaps to ensure that society has the general infrastructure upon which it can thrive. The core mission of industry is to achieve profit for its shareholders, and the core mission of universities is to produce new knowledge and to educate, not only in science and technology, but in the social sciences, humanities, and the arts. Despite these differences, all 3 agree that the benefits from collaboration are potentially enormous, and they thus pursue it. Clearly, there are risks. The academy cannot be driven entirely by the needs of companies or governments. It must be free to pursue its own agenda. And industries that invest heavily in academia might gain no advantage. The forms of collaboration between industry and the academy have changed. Basic research units like Bell Labs and Xerox PARC are rarely housed and funded within industry nowadays, and they will continue to change. In the 21st century, knowledge-based global economy, world-class research universities like Carnegie Mellon and world-class companies like TCS will explore new ways to partner. Hopefully, they can find ways to do so that will not only improve the industries and universities involved, but also the regions around them, both economically and socially. How then should the academy and industry align themselves in an environment that is truly global and increasingly competitive? So to reflect on these issues and related ones, we have convened a distinguished panel, which I would like to introduce to you now. So panelists, please join me up here in the front of the room. Have your seats. Jay Whitacre is a professor of engineering and public policy, materials science and engineering at Carnegie Mellon. Dr. Whitacre works on synthesizing, characterizing, and implementing promising materials and device architectures for energy storage and generation technologies such as lithium-ion batteries, fuel cells, and photovoltaics. He also explores the policy implications involved with selecting and implementing renewable energy technologies. Dr. Whitacre holds 5 patents, granted or pending, and he has authored or co-authored more than 20 peer-reviewed journal articles and has received numerous awards. Jelena Kovačević is the David Edward Schramm Professor and head of electrical and computer engineering, a professor of biomedical engineering. And Dr. Kovačević's recent work has focused on providing signal representation tools to be used primarily in communication and biomedical systems. She is a fellow of the IEEE and EUSIPCO, which I take to mean European Signal Processing something.
So I would be the one who could define the word digital.
Yes. An entrepreneur in her own right and co-author of multiple books. Chandra, you've been introduced to. And since we've heard from Chandra already, I'd like to begin by providing Jay and Jelena an opportunity to briefly talk about their own experiences with industry academic partnerships and to comment on how they have impacted your careers either positively or negatively. Jay.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Good. I came to Carnegie Mellon about 8 years ago. I was previously a rocket scientist, not really, but I worked at the Jet Propulsion Lab, and I did work on some really exciting projects there. But they weren't, in my experience, what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to do something that maybe had more immediate impact on direct societal needs. So this position at CMU that I took is very unusual. Half material science and engineering, which is a more common, well-established field, and this other department called engineering and public policy, which is a kind of an unusual thing. It's a policy department in an engineering school where we study the technical and economic aspects of policy decisions, and we try to inform good decision making vis-a-vis good technical analysis. This is so exciting to me. What a jump from sort of working for NASA to doing that. In my early time here, I investigated or considered, well, what can I do well and what does society need? In very large format, very inexpensive energy storage was something that became really apparent as a need, as a hole out there in the technical space that I could contribute to. So I started did some experiments, found some things, and in 2008 had a couple results that were compelling enough to garner some funding. I had a choice to make at that point. Do I go with a more traditional academic path of trying to find money from a government sponsor somewhere, or at the time there was a huge amount of interest in the venture funding community on this kind of thing? I chose that path. I brought in a fair amount of money. We set up an incubation project within the confines of CMU. CMU allowed this to happen, for which I'm very grateful. And we incubated this new idea at the university. When it ripened to the extent that it was ready, which took about a year and a half, we spun it out. And we spun it out here in Lawrenceville in Pennsylvania. The company now is known as Aquion Energy, and it now has 160 employees. And we are producing and shipping product around the world at the factory in Westmoreland County, the old Sony factory. So it's gone from this basic idea that started here at CMU to a multinational organization that is producing and shipping product in about 6.5, 7 years, which is fast. If you follow innovation theory, especially materials-intensive invention and innovation, you realize that that's a quick path. And we cut a lot of corners, we made a lot of mistakes, but we also did some really good things. And the key thing was recruiting best possible teammates to move to Pittsburgh and to make this happen, and to continue to garner the interplay between the stuff that was coming out of the university, the stuff that was happening in the R&D lab, and the stuff that was happening at the factory. There's this really intricate dance that you do between the results that happen in these different locations to find the shortest path between invention and product. And I feel like it's something I've lived, very intimately the past 5 or 6 years, and it's been a great experience. We've raised now about $140 million, and we are now bringing in real revenue, which is super exciting. So, and I want to thank the state of Pennsylvania as well for giving us support, and also a couple key government agencies, Department of Energy, early on also gave us great support to make this happen. So it's been a lovely, amazing experience that I'm happy to talk about more.
Jelena.
So I came here from Bell Labs in 2003, and I thought I would change the scale of this discussion, go more from an individual researcher, faculty member point of view. So what I do is really build mathematical models to mine information from data, signals. It can be images, it can be audio signals, it can be stock market signals, what have you. And the last 10 or so years I've been working mostly in mining data from biological and medical images. So one interesting project that I have now, and that's the part of industry collaboration, is building such models and software to diagnose middle ear infection. And the reason for doing this is you could go to a pediatrician, but they're actually notoriously bad at doing that. Or not bad, but there are conditions that look similar when you look into the ear. And if you could actually do this automatically with a model and a piece of software, that would be of great value as a diagnostic aid. And we are doing this actually in collaboration with Children's Hospital at the University of Pittsburgh, Enrico Innovations, whose CEO is also from India, and he's an ECE alum. And we are building, or they're rather building, a prototype otoscope, which is what the pediatrician puts into the kid's ear, to take a picture, and then the software or our models would automatically sort of diagnose the condition. Now, from my point of view, I went into this field because of math, but I became an engineer. So it's extremely satisfying to feel that my work actually could potentially have larger impact outside of me and my own intellectual satisfaction for doing what I'm doing. Now, from another point of view, as a department head of a really large department, actually largest on campus and number of faculty, it's really important to see the benefits from both sides. We as faculty have the luxury and the benefit of potentially looking farther ahead, being able to dream a little bit, while the industry doesn't have that luxury. But on the other hand, you have the sense and the pulse of the market, and together these two, this combination can really create powerful impact. The companies have access to top talent, and we, in turn, get access to companies and place our students, which of course, all of them eventually want to find jobs after they get these great CMU degrees. And finally, there is the education and learning part of it. By placing our students into internships, they get to see what the real world looks like and have this more gradual sort of ascent from their work being only about being educated to their work being only about being at work. So there is this really symbiosis between the two and mutual benefits that I think, as this is yet another example of how we could create something really powerful by partnering with companies that have the virtue, as the governor said, to see the virtue in us at Carnegie Mellon. So thank you.
So maybe you could, Chandra, comment a little bit on what you see as the role governments can play, both local, statewide, federal, and global, on making these partnerships not only attractive, but also structured so they benefit industry, academia, but also society at large.
That's a very long question.
Pick any part of it you like.
I think the most important thing is the ability to collaborate. I made a remark in my speech. With the technological changes that are happening, not only technological, economic, societal. I think if you take all the dimensions, probably we are going through one of the unique times where we are going through change in multiple dimensions. So problems are different in different parts of the globe. And the underlying principle is the technology is going to be the main driver in solving problems of different nature for industry, for society, for economic growth, etc. And partnerships like this will become a lot more important than ever before in my mind. And governments have to promote these partnerships. And how they will do it is by the very presence here of the governor is a very important statement. Sometimes it is symbolic, sometimes it is policy, sometimes it is funding. So Subra said that he's going to work with the government to get the roads sorted out here.
The airport.
Right? And the infrastructure sorted out here. So I think it's the importance of that collaboration, because as was pointed out, as industry, we have that experience. We feel the problems much more closely. But at the same time, we get caught up in meeting the quarter numbers, right? We've got to deliver numbers.
Right.
So we can't say that we will take the next 5 years or 4 years. So we've got to take while we have to do that, we've got to keep an eye on the car that we're driving on the highway. So that's the challenge.
So many people comment on or ask questions about how intellectual property needs to be managed so these partnerships can be successful. So let me pose that question to the panel. You've all had experience directly. I think the situation differs from country to country, even state to state. But could you relate any of your experiences in terms of what worked and what didn't work with respect to intellectual property and how that works?
Are you asking me?
Sure.
Okay.
And then Jay, you can take it then, and Chandra can.
So it's interesting because I had two different experiences. In Bell Labs, this was sort of a well-oiled machine. So there was an IP department, and they would sort of systematically go and look at what people were producing and just sort of force us to do patents, right? Then I think what would happen, the big companies at the time, IBM Research and Bell Labs would trade, patents in bulk. Here it was different. It was I was much more involved in the process of, the patent with, for example, RICO. And I could see that, you can really get stuck, on some, I'm not saying it's a small, but you get stuck on one issue and it takes a long time to move from there. So finding ways of facilitating or creating sort of boilerplate, agreements, which I think, CMU is doing now or trying to do very much, like master agreements, to simplify this and to take this part away from the collaboration and to let it go forward, because this would really stop us. That's I think, one of the key issues, in the university environment.
Jay?
Yeah, I think the obligation that universities have in the United States to not allow IP to be assigned to funders until whatever it is that has been funded is able to reach a fair market assessment. This is all buried in the IRS tax code. Because we can't do that, there's a real limitation. I know I've personally been involved with several negotiations with outside potential industry partners who would love to be part of what's going on at CMU, but their lawyers simply have a thing. Well, if we're funding you, we will own your intellectual property. And as a grant-bearing, federal grant-bearing institution, we are unable to do that. And this is a reality of the way that the university and the industry interact in this country. A side story is that a close colleague of mine who happens to be a Canadian professor has a very different situation. He's enjoyed multiple millions of dollars per year from 3M for over a decade to do amazing research. He's built up an extraordinary lab, and he is probably one of, if not the most famous researcher in this field. Part or greatly because of the fact that the same boundaries don't exist in Canada as they do in the United States. I'm not saying that it's bad or that it's good, either way, but it's a fact, and it's something that because we have lawyers on both sides of the organizations, and we have to figure out every time there's some different sticking point. Something happens and we have to find a way around it. And oftentimes it's not a good, even practical solution for either side. Sometimes nothing ever happens. So that's difficult. And I don't have in mind a solution, but I can certainly describe the problem.
Well, maybe Chandra, you could follow up on that and describe how things differ across different international boundaries and situations, because I'm sure you've dealt with
I think it's the most complicated subject
So complicated.
in terms of who owns the IP. Many times people say we create joint IP. I never understand that because, either you have it or you don't have it. Mm-hmm. So people come up with ways to resolve them. Sometimes they give royalty-free, perpetual license to one party. The other party takes it for monetizing. Sometimes it's a non-exclusive on both sides. So there are various ways by which people resolve. But the fact of the matter is that there is no uniform way in which it can be easily solved, and it is easily solved in any part of the world. And I was talking during lunch, and I understand that you've developed some different models. One of the things I said to Subra is that we've got to figure out a way by which as we progress our relationship, do joint research and so on and so forth, we don't get stuck on these things. Right. So we've got to have some templates, and whenever we have a tough issue, we've got to have a mechanism to find a way out, because it shouldn't stop the speed. Agility is key. In today's world, agility is key. Mm-hmm. And most of the agility is not about running fast, it's about not creating roadblocks internally. Most organizations have those roadblocks either because of bureaucracy or because we can't agree on something. So we got to be spending time on the market. At least as businesses, I feel that 90% should be spent on the market. not on solving these issues. But it's complex subject.
Are there large differences in the IP setting in Asia and Europe and America, or is it roughly?
I think I would say that here it's a lot more matured. I think US is a lot more matured, and other markets are still developing.
More chaotic?
Yeah.
Okay, let's open the floor to some audience questions. Steve, would you?
Sure. There we go. We have a question here about the global nature of the partnership. In this globalizing world, we've talked about how the boundaries are blurring. How do you choose where to make your investment? The question in hand is related to TCS, but I think you could ask it the other way. How does a university choose which partners to spend time with?
From my point of view, I think it's we're going to be global in our thinking as well. So, to me, what attracted TCS towards Carnegie Mellon is the areas in which we are focusing and the areas in which CMU has a dominant position. Whether I mentioned those areas: robotics, machine learning, analytics. And these kind of areas, there is a cutting edge work that's going on, and the computer science education in Carnegie Mellon and the research in computer science in Carnegie Mellon is renowned. I mean, you can go by surveys, you can go by what people say, but at the end of the day, when you know and when you see that that strength is done in university, that's going to rub on TCS, and there's an alignment in terms of what we want to do and what the university is focused on. So it presented itself with an opportunity, and then we said it's the right thing to do. So it's not me alone and my team, and I had to go through the board approval process like you had to do, Subra.
Well, let me turn the question around and ask you, Jelena, as you're head of the department, if you were considering what strategic moves you would make for the department to attract corporate partnerships or to involve your department in, how would you look at that, and what would you?
Well, that's an interesting one, because every time we look at this, it's a really multifaceted problem that also involves, involving our alums sitting in these corporations, and you need to have a champion within the company. This wouldn't have happened without you, right? So you need to create this. You need to create these relationships, and you need to nurture them and find what strategically makes sense for us. Carnegie Mellon has never been a place that does everything. We cannot possibly do everything. So we need to focus ourselves on a few key areas where we feel we have the strength and we can make a difference, and then strategically find those companies where we can make such connections. And so this is exactly what we do in terms of when we think about our strategic planning. What are the key thrust areas, let's say, for the department, and then how do we go out and look at the top companies in these areas to engage them to work with us? Because this is really, it's key for the companies. As I said, it's a wonderful opportunity to get access to top talent, and top also leadership talent and managerial talent through PhD students and so on. And for our faculty to have funding to do the research that they need to do, given how the funding is going in terms of federal funding. That, it's been flat, and we don't know what's going to happen in the future. We need to be more agile in creating such partnerships even more than before.
Dean Shinas, you mentioned earlier the different purposes of universities and corporations, and we have a couple of questions here that go to the questions of culture. Universities are very different places from corporations with different core motivations, perhaps, overlapping sets of interest, but different cultures. What are the risks and obstacles that presents? How do you overcome them, and what are there benefits that come out of bringing two such distinct kinds of cultures together?
Jay, you want to take that at first?
Yeah, I think,
Since you've lived in both worlds?
Yeah, having a foot in both those worlds, and it's funny when a technology or a company emerges from just an idea, there's almost no separation culturally. And what's been fascinating is to watch how, as you mature the technology and the entity, the venture, you need a different sort of people and a different sort of culture to make it really optimally effective. And it's complicated to grow in that way. So I really can appreciate that there's these different buckets. I think both sides have, in the best of worlds, can really appreciate each other. And I think one of the things in general is that it's somewhat lopsided. I feel like the industrial world or the commercial world has a deep appreciation for the academic. And I think the academic side of things oftentimes doesn't have good visibility into what's happening in the commercial world. Industrial processes, industrial level, or true business level decision making is often either not of interest to academics or is just something they're not presented with enough resolution to be interesting to them. And that dichotomy is kind of interesting in itself. And so I find myself now realizing how interesting some industrial, it's just engineering kinds of projects are. They're actually deeply fundamental, and they could be highly academic, but they're just not seen that way in the academic community. And so, one thing that could be done, I think, is to pull a bit more of what is interesting about the manufacturing industrial world. You can distill out some really amazing, more fundamental things that I think could project into academia more effectively.
Especially the bottlenecks maybe that need to be.
Yeah, it's those key bottlenecks, and it's not just engineering, it's not just this go solve the problem. There's some real interesting basic things that could be done that often. I see a lot of the work that's being done, and I thought, if that person would just look at this problem, this could be fascinating, and boy, could we solve this faster.
Chandra, you had some?
No, I think it's the beauty of this whole thing is about having those two cultures on the one side. On the other side, whenever you are trying to solve a problem and people come together, they kind of have a common objective. I mean, if you're talking about research in Internet of Things or in solving a specific problem, a driverless car or whatever it is, the people from, in this case, TCS and the researchers from CMU are driven by the common objective. Then the passion takes over everything else, right?
So it's finding the common problem.
Yeah, it's finding the common
Right, that
problem.
both are curious
it's a
about
common area of
need.
interest. That's where it's the problems at the end of the day, which drive people.
Yeah, I don't think that in the end there are real obstacles, that the cultures
Yeah.
themselves pose obstacles, because if you get together and you have something you want to do together, it's actually these different cultures just
Yeah.
bring a diverse point of view. So I don't know that we have, that I've ever heard of people not enjoying this or not,
No.
this was any sort of an obstacle. If anything, it's actually exciting, right?
I have a great question here that's aimed toward the TCS, or framed about the TCS-CMU collaboration, but I think could be opened up more broadly to all industry academic partnerships. How do you engage students? What can they bring to it? How do they benefit from it?
I think one of the objectives for us in this whole partnership is to engage students. I think what we envisage is to create a number of projects which are going to be joint projects, where we imagine that there will be TCS researchers will be co-located here with CMU faculty, CMU students, solving a particular problem. And we've got some idea about the areas we want to focus on, and the reverse will also happen. We hope that some of the CMU faculty will visit and be with us and work with us in our labs in India at time to time. Maybe CMU students will be part of these projects and may do interns in TCS in some exciting projects. And the other thing we are talking about is how to engage students in some of the engineering colleges with whom we work in India. How do we bring those students together and the CMU students together, maybe through an online platform, maybe through we've got some ideas, we've got some prototypes. Those details are we work through. But the most exciting thing in this whole partnership is not only the research element, but also the idea generation by getting all these students together. Because, as Subra said in his speech, we're all looking for the best talent. Probably you're looking for the best faculty, best staff, and try to recruit the right students. And we are trying to recruit the best students coming out of here. So it's
Anybody?
I just wanted to add that we just had this summer the first instance of this internship program with the PES School of Engineering in Bangalore. And this was actually through, again, the connections, or it's all about connections. It was my ex-PhD student who wanted to create some sort of a formalized internship program with CMU, and we paired their best students with our faculty, and faculty were really excited to get these undergrad interns, and they were fantastic. So, you know, they're going to go back. They worked with our faculty and our graduate students. They're going to go back, and it's kind of like a, you know, it's a multiplier, right? So the good things from CMU go that way, and you know, we will be able to go back and, you know, perhaps a change. You know, our faculty will go there and give talks and so on. If we have now an industrial or corporate partner, we can, you know, add more of these, you know, educational institutions and, you know, more than one place plus industry to help us perhaps facilitate that. So that would be very exciting.
Yeah, and just to reinforce that, we truly are an international university. A huge fraction of our graduate student population, and indeed undergrad as well, international. And a lot of these folks come here with the intention of going back. And so the opportunity exists already for us to have this impact visa, just with a good education and providing them, you know, what Carnegie Mellon has to offer here in Pittsburgh, but also other campuses around the world. And this is just going to add to it, and maybe providing destinations in India that are more explicit. This is a, you know, a Tata CMU collaborative site in India. Our Indian and other students may have a more specific point of focus to go back to.
I think we have time for one more question.
Just about one. So to loop back to the to an original topic, what are the conditions under which? Well, let me preface it with a little of my own personal knowledge. There are universities all across this country and cities all across this country that are anxious to try to promote these kind of partnerships. There are fewer places where that actually flourishes. What are the conditions under which these kind of partnerships can flourish, or what, as I sometimes hear people say around this campus, is the secret sauce?
Subra?
I'm not on the panel, but I'm happy to answer.
Please. Nice job, Steve.
Thank you. So when you put highly talented faculty with highly talented students and the right conditions and give them even the minimum amount of resources, magic happens. That's the secret sauce. And Carnegie Mellon has done that for 115 years. And our goal is to accelerate that. So by providing scholarship to students, you make it easier for them to come. By connecting them to industry. Innovation, I often say, is a contact sport. You increase the amount of contact, you increase the amount of innovation. The other thing, which many of you already referred to, is the diversity. When people from different backgrounds, diversity in the broadest sense, people coming from very different backgrounds, very different disciplines in which they are trained, very different cultural backgrounds, racial backgrounds, geographical backgrounds, national backgrounds, look at the same problem. They look at it from very different vantage points. So they do much better with respect to innovation than any homogeneous group addressing the same problem. It doesn't matter what that homogeneous group is. So innovation by itself is significantly enriched and enhanced when you put interdisciplinary perspectives and intercultural, international perspectives. So Carnegie Mellon has a secret sauce, and many great American research universities have that sauce, and Carnegie Mellon is one of those great American research universities. And I think we have historically have to compete. We've done a lot with little resources. But part of my objective, part of my job through these engagements is to provide the faculty and students with the necessary resources so that the talent takes over. And that's why we are very grateful to TCS for making this happen. So that's the secret sauce. close this and invite you to come to the reception that will follow this immediately. But let me take this opportunity to thank all our panelists, to thank our moderator, Richard Shyness, Jay, Jelena, Chandra for coming all the way. He flew in from Mumbai just over the weekend. In fact, he was going to come in, arrived this morning, and I tried to talk him out of it. but it's amazing. I also want to thank all our colleagues from TCS for traveling very large distances to be with us today. I want to thank Governor Wolf once again from your very busy schedule. We look forward to the budget, and we know that the government can fix. The government can fix all our problems. I want to thank Rich Fitzgerald, Mayor Peduto, and thank you all for coming. And there is a reception outside. There is an opportunity.